Welcome to today's episode of the Normalized Surrogacy podcast by Surrogacy Mentor. I'm your host, Marielle Schuberth, three-time experienced gestational surrogate and intake manager for Surrogacy Mentor and Modern Parent Mentor, where our aim is a safe, ethical, and enjoyable surrogacy journey for all. Today, I'm excited to have Amanda with us, and today's topic is an interview with a surrogate. So welcome, Amanda. We're happy to have you with us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and so today's topic is, interview with a surrogate, and we feel that Amanda's story is definitely one that we want to share to kind of give a full scope of surrogacy and when things don't necessarily go as planned, even when you do everything right as a surrogate. And we want to applaud Amanda not only for hanging in there through all of her journey, which she'll soon tell us about, but we also want to thank her for being brave enough to share the not so fuzzy side of a surrogacy journey for everybody, so you can kind of understand that sometimes things just don't kind of go as planned and work out the way that you anticipate them to work out. And so right now we'll start with Amanda. Why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself and your family and what made you want to try a surrogacy?
So I am wife and mom of 3 kids, 2 8-year-old twins, boy-girl twins, and a 4-year-old little girl. We live in northern Maine, and even before I had my own kids, I just always felt I wanted to help someone else have the joy of having kids as well.
What kind of led you down this path of surrogacy? It sounds great. I guess we'll just kind of dive right in. Amanda's got a lot of story to kind of tell. So talk to us a little bit about, your journeys. You signed up with an agency and you're matched with your first set of intended parents. So why don't you just walk us through a little bit of your first journey and kind of how that all went down?
Yeah, okay. So I had actually initially started back in 2019, interviewed with one agency, and I hadn't had my third child yet. And they said that that was a big deal. And they actually told me to come back after I was done, because they prefer you to be done building your own family. And this agency stuck by that. And then I ended up with All Families back 2022. That's when I met one set of intended parents. We actually met during my medical evaluation, the first time I flew out to Oregon. And the first roadblock was after that evaluation, they actually broke match. No clue why, just before going into legal. And then I met my other set of intended parents within a month of that. I'd already gone through the medical evaluation, so I passed, so we were able to jump right into legal. We had 3 transfers. I did everything.
And that's the hardest part, I think, about surrogacy in general, and IVF, I suppose, for any IVF warriors who are going out there, is that sometimes you can do everything right, and it's just not in the cards. It could be embryos, it could be, and my heart breaks for you and your intended parents, because it's easy for someone on the outside to say that, right? Easy for me to say it's not your fault, you didn't do anything wrong, and you may know that in your rational mind, right? But there's still got to be some feelings there of all of that, and it's a really hard thing to process, I think, as a surrogate, especially to process that loss in general. Even though if the transfers didn't take, that's still a loss to some degree for you and your intended parents. And I know from my personal experience with having miscarriages as a surrogate, there is this kind of feeling of guilt or shame that you did something wrong, or what did I do that caused this, or what could I have done differently? And there, at least from my experience, there was kind of a level of guilt, like you feel bad for your intended parents, like you let them down. Did you kind of feel any heavy stuff around that?
I mean, I was always ready to go again. And the timeline between, some people would say that they jumped right back in. But the clinic always wanted me to have another cycle, not just the post-med bleed that happens. I'd go 50, 60, like 3 months sometimes between. I didn't, I felt that sadness for the parents.
And it is,
Yeah.
and it's a very hard thing to kind of describe because you're almost grieving a loss that is not yours to
Right.
grieve, but you grieve it, and it's a very weird thing to
Yeah.
process through because you don't know what to do with that because it's technically not your loss, right? But it is, and it isn't, and it
Hmm.
can be it's a lot to process.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a very
Yeah.
interesting dynamic just
Hmm.
mentally to kind of wrap yourself around that. But it speaks a lot to you that you were like ready to go and try again.
Hmm.
Spoken as a true giver and surrogate at heart, that you were not deterred by that at all.
Yeah.
You know that you were just ready to go, and I know after I had my two losses, I felt the same. I would have gone, especially after my first one. Like I had never had a miscarriage before,
Hmm.
and so it was almost like sobering. Like it gave me a taste of kind of what they were going through as intended parents, and it almost lit the fire more. It made me more determined to want to do that for them because I could understand it from a different kind of standpoint, which a lot of people don't understand. Like, why would you do that to yourself again? Why would you go through all of this for somebody else
Right.
again? And
Hmm.
I'm sure you had some questions from
And all
people
I
close to
had,
you.
I just had failed tests. I thought I'd see a line, and they get line eyes.
Yep,
Nothing.
yep. And I, I couldn't imagine just that feeling for you and your intended parents. And so you kind of go through all of that. You do your three transfers, which is pretty typical, as
Hmm.
far as the surrogacy contract kind of goes, right? I think it's pretty
Yeah.
routine that it's written in the contract that you'll give it X number of attempts, which tends to usually be three. And so you
Right.
try that. Your last one doesn't go through. What does that look like? And then how did your journey doesn't stop there, does it?
Well, honestly, I thought like maybe after a second attempt, the clinic might look at another way, other protocols. There we go. But they never offered that, or at least it was never offered to me on my end. I don't know if they talked about it different with the IPs or not. And then I guess the clinic had recommended that they find a new surrogate. So we broke that match. And then I wasn't ready.
Yeah, I don't blame you. It's a lot to process, and I process. I kind of had a different scenario myself, just with an actual. I had two miscarriages. So going through that, I hadn't processed not having a transfer take, so it's a very
Yeah.
different situation, but very similar. I would assume very similar feelings that can kind of come up with that. And it's okay that you weren't ready, but you kind of processed through all of that and decided. Was it on
Let's
a whim, or where you just woke up one day and were like, all right, we're gonna see if this we can try this again?
I wanted to try one more, because they say it could be the embryos don't match well with the surrogate. So I wanted to give that one more try.
Yep.
Um,
And so in the spirit of full disclosure, right, which is what we try to do on this
mhm,
podcast. We try to give you the good, the bad, the
mhm.
hard, the reality of surrogacy, and unfortunately, your reality was not the warm, fuzzy one that you were hoping for, and so. You decide that you're ready to give it one more shot, but you definitely hit some roadblocks in that attempt. So we could talk about that a little bit and kind of why that happened and what that looked like for you.
Clinics, agencies, not many want to work with you after unexplained failed transfers. It's just reaching out constantly. I think it was about a month before I'd connected with Surrogacy Mentor and you guys.
And that is another harsh kind of reality, that you tried all
Yeah.
of this and it wasn't your fault and there was
Yeah.
nothing that you did wrong, and you're like, okay, I'm not ready to let this
Yeah.
end like this. We're going to try again. And then you come up to, on paper, nobody, after this kind of history of
Yeah.
these things, nobody even wanted to look at you, and that in general had to be a hard kind of
Hmm.
thing to come up against, of like, just let me try. You just have such a big heart and you wanted to try again. And so came to us, and we definitely came up, you know, with similar hurdles to you. And to say, I will make this disclosure here: clinics and agencies have their screening criteria and their,
Mhm.
standards for a reason. It's for safety of their surrogates and, intended parents, all the things they, so it's, we're not, I don't want to blame or, put any
Mhm.
badness out there for clinics and agencies that looked at 3 failed transfers and were not willing to look at that. I know, too, sometimes intended parents can see that and not look deeper into why did that happen. Was it embryos? Was it, this? And so we worked hard to try to find somebody who was willing to just take a look, right? And I
Mhm.
know that was personally hard for me to work with you because you're so wonderful, and I know that you would make such a good surrogate. It was like if someone could just look at it, because that was the problem, right? The clinics wouldn't even look at the
They
record.
wouldn't do any additional testing. They weren't willing to do anything.
Yep, and so that was the hard part, is at
Mhm.
least look, and so I felt personally invested in that one for you, of like, if they get a look. And we were pretty upfront with you about that, like, we can't promise anything, but we promise that
Mhm.
we can try, and we will see if there's somebody who's willing to take a deeper look at what's going on and find a clinic that's willing to at least take a peek at everything and give it a shot. And we found that, right?
Mhm.
We found you a clinic that was willing to take a deeper look, and we introduced you to another set of intended parents. So why don't we kind
Mhm.
of talk about your last kind of hurrah, I guess, would be, that's a horrible way to put it. I don't know.
So their first clinic or their second one?
Let's go for it all. You found some amazing parents who felt very strongly the way that we did, that it was worth getting that kind of deeper
Yeah.
look. So we'll kind of start there. So
Yeah.
come to us, we find a match to introduce you to, and let's kind of just start there.
Yeah. They were a great match. Clinics. I never got to go to the first one. The clinic kind of put it in the intended parents' hands. And then when they said, yeah, let's give her a try, the clinic changes their mind. Man.
I know this is hard.
But they didn't give up on me either.
And I think that really speaks to the kind of family that is built through surrogacy with your surrogate and your intended parents, and that bond. You were
Yeah.
willing to go through all of this for them, and they felt the same for you. And they found a different clinic who was ready for that. And
Yeah.
I think that's what people tend to not understand, I think, about surrogacy, when they're like, what do you mean you didn't know them? You went through an agency and you're doing this for complete strangers. And
Right.
it very quickly can not be the case, right? They started as strangers, but very quickly you have this very mutual shared interest of team baby, and that team effort is unmatched. When you have that really good bond with your intended parents, you're willing to go through hellfire for them to get them that. And I know after my losses, I would have tried a million more times for my first set of intended parents that I miscarried for. Like, I'm like, I don't care
Yeah.
how many, we're getting this baby. And it's hard for people who haven't been in it to really understand that bond that you can feel with people who 2 months ago were complete strangers.
Yeah.
And it's this kind of shared quest, I suppose, to team baby. And we felt really good for both of you that you guys were able to find each other and find that match that was willing to fight for each other in
Yeah.
this kind of mutual quest for things. And
Yeah.
so you find your new clinic and went for all
They
of your.
Yeah, they did a medical evaluation. They even, I believe they did a biopsy. If they didn't, then their evaluation was a little more intense than my previous one. I actually went out there only being allowed to eat soft foods and liquids because I had just had my wisdom teeth extracted when they had scheduled it. And I was like, oh no, I can do this just fine. And just like full disclosures to them, you're doing all these blood tests. I may have lots of ibuprofen, Tylenol, and I don't know what else because you're doing these tests like literally 2 days after my anesthesia, sleeping, wisdom teeth extraction. And they're like, no,
Yep.
you're good.
Which again speaks to your commitment, that you were still ready to go right after all of that.
I tell
Uh,
you, the flying and the air pressure in the ears did not feel good with the holes in my mouth. Yeah. And they wanted to do a fully natural cycle. And they said natural. It was more modified. I still had a little bit of estradiol and progesterone, but not nearly as much as my 3 previous transfers. And then you feel they actually do the full 2-week wait, which is so hard because the other clinic, it was like 9 days after. That extra 5 days or whatever is intense.
Yep.
But like, you feel all the symptoms, but it's just the meds, you know?
Yep.
And just, I had some faint lines, but they didn't get any more.
Darker, and that's always the
Yeah.
the upside and the downside to home testing, right? And this is why
Uh-huh.
all of your clinics are going to tell you do not take home tests because they can be inaccurate and they can get
Yeah.
you excited for a false
Mhm.
positive or upset for a false negative, and they always tell you not to, but I know I was team pee on all the sticks. It's
Yeah,
very hard not to.
I tried to tell myself I wasn't going to, but then, when you get that package from your agency, or at least, I mean, not all agencies do them, but mine did those pre-transfer packages, and, there's tests in there, and it's really hard not to use them.
Yep.
And then it just doesn't work.
And I know in, kind of your discussions with the new match and the clinic, because of the previous failed transfers, it was discussed beforehand that we would give it one shot, right? Just because
Hmm.
embryos are not in unlimited supply, and they
Hmm.
were really hopeful, and I know that you were too, but we're trying to manage expectations or be realistic of like, okay, like we really want this to work, but we understand that we have some odds stacked against us, but they really wanted to give it a shot. And so I can't imagine the kind of depth of feeling of getting those beta results.
It was a little roller coaster at the end there because we got the beta results and then like within a day or two they were processing and then they said, "Yeah, we're going to have to move on, thank you for trying." And then a couple days later I got a phone call from my coordinator at the agency saying, "Hey, so they're wondering if the clinic's willing, would you try again?" I'm like, "Yeah, of course I would."
Yeah.
I mean, this clinic has multiple different protocols, and I've seen them use the different protocols on a friend of mine that I actually met the first time I was there. But the clinic actually, they said, "Well, no, we think you shouldn't." So it was down because of the fail, and then back up because, oh, they might actually try again with me, and then back down because of the clinic.
And it's just you are a remarkable person for going through all of this. I think surrogates in general are remarkable people who are willing to do all of this, but there is a special place for people who are willing to continue on for somebody else through all of this, because it's not something you have to do. It's not.
Right.
It's something that you chose, and you chose to continue trying, and you chose to offer hope to those families. And even though it didn't turn out the way that you expected, I hope that you know that that hope is more than they had before you went in. And that is something. It truly is. And I think that, lessons to be learned from this. You and I were talking the other day at the airport because you are offering support to other women right now. And I think that again speaks to, you're not just washing your hands of it like, I can't think of this anymore. It's like, nope, I'm still going to be there and show up for other people in these situations, and be a support for other women going through this journey. And it's a huge thing that you try to do and that you're continuing to do for other people, and even sharing your story on this podcast, which I know is unbelievably hard. You're still willing to do that so that somebody else may not feel alone in this, having gone through failed transfers and having it not work out, because you don't see those stories plastered all over Instagram, do you? No,
You
because
really don't.
no, because it's something like that nobody wants to talk about. It's kind of like a miscarriage. If you say that you've been through one, there's an army of women who will be behind you that have experienced something else, but it's not something that's talked about a whole lot. And I think it's important that somebody listening to this, whether it's an intended parent or a surrogate who's been through something similar, because you are not alone in this part of the journey, you're not. That's the thing with IVF. Sometimes there can be no explainable reason why things don't work out. Everything could be perfect. Everything looks great as it did in all of your situations, and it just doesn't work for whatever reason. And not feeling alone in that is huge. And so you offering that to intended parents and surrogates is big. Just even if they hear nothing, but they can see, okay, so it's not just me that has gone through this. I mean, that is.
I did it all. The blood work, everything, the linings, they all were perfect. I did the fries after transfer. I did the pineapple cores. I did all the things everyone talks about, the pomegranate juice. I did it all. I had bed rest the first transfer for the first day and the day after. I had one with minimal bed rest where you could leave the next day. I had one that was no bed rest and you could go walking. I went to the zoo, you know?
Yep.
I did it all and none of it made any difference. And, lots of people swear by certain things, but, when people also leave those Facebook support groups that have stories like mine, so you don't hear about it in those social medias because nobody's in there to share them anymore.
Yeah, and that's
I'll
the
admit,
hardest
I
part.
left them, but
Yeah, no, and that's the hardest part, and that's what we love about our platform, and being willing to say the hard things, because it doesn't do anybody any good to only talk about the good things, right? And same thing with, like, making an informed decision. Like, yes, like, we all hope that a surrogacy journey goes well and goes perfectly the first time and all of that, but you do need to understand that there's no guarantee here. There's no guarantee that even doing all the right things, trying all the different protocols, there's no guarantee that it will work. And you need to be prepared for that. And I think that's the hardest part too about not talking about it, is you feel alone, you feel guilt, you feel shame, and you need to know going in, which nobody talks about that when you're getting ready for all of this, that there is a possibility that it's not going to work out, and you need to be prepared for that. And it's definitely one of those things that nobody wants to talk about. And yes, it is not something that happens all the time, but it does happen, and it's one of those things you need to be prepared for, kind of like twins or triplets. Like, doesn't happen all the time, but it does happen, and you need to be prepared for that and be able to make your decision knowing all of the possibilities, the good and the bad. I still think, actually, I know that even if somebody had told you all of these possibilities, you'd still do it, because I know that you, and that's the big thing about informed choice and informed decisions and all of that, is you got to have all of the information.
Someone could tell me if I hadn't done it, that they could see the future and it's not going to work for me at all. And I'd be like, I'm not going to believe you till I try.
Yep. And that's the thing. It wouldn't necessarily sway your decision, but you'd have that informed choice. And again, a lot of times, and especially with your last match, it was a traditional couple. And a lot of times you just offering that chance, that hope, is more than what they had going into it. And that alone is huge. You gave them that opportunity that they didn't have themselves, and that says a lot. That means it does mean something.
Yeah, I would say that my first set wasn't traditional either.
Yeah.
And it was just, I want to help those that aren't going to be able to without the help, I wanted to try.
Yep. And it still gave them more than they had before you walked in. And that, I know you wish, obviously we all wish it would have turned out differently, but it didn't. But hope is a magical thing. And I think it's so amazing of you that you were able to give that, and that you still do. And so now it's been a little while since everything. How are you kind of processing? Are you doing good? I mean, it's still, I know talking about it, I well up when I talk to you about it. Are you feeling okay? Like, let me rephrase. What advice would you have I'll ask two questions. What advice would you offer any surrogate going through the beginning phases of their journey in general?
Just basically, transfer outcomes are out of your control and don't beat yourself up over it.
Yep, and I think that's a big one. And then, do you have any, maybe not advice, but words of, maybe not wisdom, wouldn't know how to put it, but anything you'd like to say to an intended parent or surrogate listening who's going through a failed transfer or something similar to what you're going through? Is there any thing that you could offer them in this moment or something?
They're not alone.
And I think that in and of itself is a lot, because it's hard. It's a very, like I said, surrogacy in general, if we think about it, it is weird. It's a weird thing that you're doing that's atypical, that even most of the time in your close circle of people, they've never met a surrogate. They don't know what that's like. Do surrogacy even under the best of circumstances. Most people don't even know how to talk to you or what questions to ask when you say this baby's not mine and all of the things. It becomes especially hard when you're processing through something hard that nobody knows how to help you handle, especially when it comes to loss or things that don't turn out the same. Then you really feel alone because you were kind of in the boat by yourself to begin with, and then no one understands this at all, let alone your specific situation. So I think leaning on those support groups and trying to find those who are either still there or willing to talk about it is big. And I think you being able to come on here and talk to us about it, and us being able to use our platform with this podcast to start, this is why it's called Normalized Surrogacy, it's to start normalizing these conversations, and that it is okay to talk about the hard stuff just as much as it is okay to talk about the good stuff. Can really help, because I can only imagine the feeling of loneliness in that, of not being able to seek out that kind of specific support, because it's a very rare thing that anybody has to go through, and we don't ever want anybody to feel like that. And you are just such an amazing woman, and I truly hope that you know that, and I hope that anybody listening who's going through something similar on the surrogate side, intended parent side, even support person side, talk to people. Talk about it when you're ready and when you can. Doesn't have to go into the gory details. Even just saying, I'm here for you. What do you need from me? Just offering that support is big, because not talking about it makes it feel shameful, and it's nothing to be ashamed of. It really isn't. And we love you, and we feel for you and your intended parents, and you rock. You truly do. And we really appreciate you kind of coming on here and
it's
talking.
definitely easier to talk about with my friends outside than it is recording.
Oh, well, that brings us to the end of this episode of the Normalized Surrogacy podcast by Surrogacy Mentor. I want to thank our very special guest, Amanda, for joining us today. Be sure to check us out online at surrogacymentor.com and modernparentmentor.com if you're interested in knowing whether surrogacy is right for you, and take our 2-minute easy quiz on our website if you're interested in becoming a surrogate. Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast to learn more about gestational surrogacy and how to have a safe, ethical, and enjoyable surrogacy journey. Talk to you next time.